Okay, it's 3:45. Welcome back, everybody. It does look like most of us are now back in the plenary room. What we're going to do for the next hour is we're going to go group by group to allow the individual breakout groups to report back on what they discussed. And I was in the flood management group, and our discussion covered quite a bit of ground. So I'm expecting that we're going to hear a lot from the people who are reporting back, and for those of you who are facilitators who are going to be reporting out, I apologize particularly to those of you who are near the top of the list because you're not going to have much time to get your thoughts together. But bear in mind that you also had a note taker, and we will be able to finish summarizing what happened in your groups after this discussion this afternoon. So don't feel like you have to cover everything. Just try to hit the high points. So in the interest of making sure that we can hear from Bruce DiGennaro, who's got to drop out at 4 o'clock, we're going to swap habitat management we're just going to move habitat management to the top of the queue. So Bruce will begin. And just a general comment, I think we agreed that we were going to hold off on Q&A until after we had gone through all of the report outs to make sure we get to all of them. So if you have, if any member of the participating group has a question or comment, please feel free to put it in the meeting chat, and we will get to those as soon as we get to the end of the report outs. So without further ado, Bruce, you have the floor for habitat management.
Great, thanks, Mike. Thanks for making the adjustment. So as you noted, we had a very robust conversation, and Megan did a fabulous job taking notes. She emailed me the notes. They're 5 pages, so that just gives you a sense for the depth of the conversation. So tricky to hit highlights, but I'm going to do this kind of cutting across these questions because a lot of the comments really did touch on multiple questions. And so one of the initial comments that was made by actually John Calloway, but everybody tended to agree, was this idea that from a habitat standpoint, starting sooner rather than later is a good strategy because it takes time for these things to evolve and to adjust and to build, and the sooner we get moving, the better. So that was one takeaway I thought worth mentioning. The other thing we talked a lot about is collaboration across groups and the need to have some mutual objectives so that we're all trying to work off of a single sheet of music, if you will, or at least understand what our objectives are. And that part of that also could be a focus on scenario planning and trying to think ahead and anticipate. There's been a lot of conversation about forecasting and using our modeling tools or building modeling tools that allow us to look out and plan accordingly so that we're not playing catch up quite so much. And then another concept that emerged is this idea of virtual collaboratory, an idea that was an outgrowth of the Integrated Modeling Steering Committee. And also this idea that's been around for a while but never fully operationalized, which is the idea of a restoration hub. Kind of coming back to the habitat management question, is a center place for people to share and to engage and to work together and to build teams that can band together, have common interests, and be supported possibly by multiple entities, so it's not a single entity. The idea of an enterprise was talked about a lot. And one of the ideas that was mentioned was maybe approaching this in a pilot capacity so that we don't try to take on everything all at once and try to get our structures used to operating in that way. So lots of other good ideas, Mike, but that might be a reasonable place to stop and see if people have questions or wherever you want to go next.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. So again, I invite anyone who has a question for Bruce or for the habitat management group to put that question in meeting chat. and we will come back to these questions after we get through the report outs. And FYI, for the rest of the facilitators, we've got about an hour, so you should probably try to limit your report out to about 5 minutes. If we all do 7 minutes, then we probably won't have any time for Q&A at the end. So that should give you an idea of the time range you have. Thanks a lot, Bruce. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thanks, Mike. And thanks to all the people that participated. Lots of good ideas, as I said.
So our next report out, Nancy, are you back in the room?
Yeah, I'm here.
Great. So Nancy is going to report out on the water supply management breakout session.
Thank you. I think that one major takeaway from our breakout session was that people overall really like the idea of a collaboratory where people from across diverse agencies can address grand challenges. And that ran through responses to all 4 questions. I'm going to just tick off some takeaways from each of the questions. Number 1, build our expertise about what to expect with climate change. Better access and integrate the information that we have to inform action. Don't let management solutions get stuck in a report on a shelf. Improve forecasting on a seasonal scale. Resources and expertise are 2 different things, and we need both. Question 2, build on AB 1755, the Water Data Initiative. Make sure data are interoperable and continuous. Make sure research is continuous. As models are improved, maintained, and launched, make sure that they talk to one another. Allow scientists to focus on what they think is really needed, not merely to answer questions that decision makers are asking. Sometimes the really important questions are the ones that we haven't asked yet. Hang on, I got a little bit more on question 2. That was the better part of the discussion. Integrate models spatially. In other words, what is your boundary for cash flow? And temporal, I can't say that word, but in time, monthly and daily, for example, time steps. Get that coordinated. Reconcile all the data through state leadership. Have a state scientific hub where we use consistent methodologies and models. Use the state budget to encourage collaboration. Give it good funding and consistent leadership. Federal and local scientists would want to become part of it. Question number 3. We need to improve our capacity to handle very large data sets and to organize the computing. Become more multidisciplinary. Academic institutions can lead the way here. Put more effort into quality control of the data that we do gather as state agencies, so in a crisis we're not arguing about accuracy. Acknowledge that if California is going to continue to have a budget that goes boom and bust, then science will necessarily suffer. Find a way, this is question number 4. Find a way to bring scientists together with water managers so that water managers can learn from the longer view that scientists take. Become more futuristic in our thinking. Make the collaboratory a place where young leaders can grow and cohorts, interdisciplinary cohorts are formed that stay in touch across the rest of their careers. Cultivate and protect technical leaders within bureaucracies. And consider Earth Cubed and the National Water Center as collaboratory models. And be ready with all these ideas so that when crisis strikes and people are ready to embrace change, we can get it done. That's it.
Great. That was admirably succinct. Moving on to flood management. Avery, are you ready?
I am ready. And as you noted earlier, Mike, we covered a lot of ground, so I'm going to try my hardest to be brief. The flood breakout group also had a lot of support for the concept of a collaboratory. Since others have touched on that, I will focus on some of the other points that we talked about. So one thing that was discussed kind of throughout the breakout group was that integration across resource areas is important because crises in flood management can sort of cascade into other crises for other resource areas such as ecosystem, water supply, etc. And so there's a need to make sure that the science enterprise is set up to be able to integrate information and data and models across those resources. The group identified several different examples of crises that could happen that touch on flood management, things like levee failures, island failures, extreme droughts. And then based on those examples, we talked about the need for both better prediction capabilities as well as more capability for rapid response, being able to respond to emergencies or crises like right when they happen. So with regard to prediction, some of the things that came up were improved data on levee shape and integrity that reflects the investments that have been made since the DREAM study, improved hydrologic modeling, the use of scenario modeling. I think that came up earlier in the habitat summary. So the use of scenario modeling to understand the impacts of different types of events, improved cloud computing capabilities and remote sensing capabilities, etc. And then with regard to rapid response, the group talked about being able to deploy funding and human resources very quickly, both to be able to provide scientific information to flood managers and decision makers around the flood event itself, but also to be able to study the systems and the resources that are potentially impacted by flood events, such as aquatic ecosystems. And then the group also talked about the importance of being able to translate science to decision makers and managers, and the importance of building relationships so that there's kind of a shared understanding of the important questions and needs. And somebody mentioned the need to co-produce science, really collaborating between the scientists and the managers, as well as a need to engage more diverse young scientists and researchers to begin to build up the professionals who will be in leadership roles in the next 10 to 15 years. So that's my summary. Molly, I don't know if you have anything to add.
That sounded great. Thank you. Hit all the major points.
Thanks.
Yes, also admirably succinct. Jessica, are you ready for native species management?
Sure. Hi, Mike. Hi, everyone. Those are great summaries. I'll try and do the same. So we talked about a lot of different things. We actually did not talk about the collaboratory that much, but we really, we talked about the range of activities everywhere from what we're doing now for native species to thinking about future events and how to address those. There were a few ideas that came up again and again that we talked about in great detail. One is the observational network overall, so the network of monitoring. The other is integrated ecosystem assessments, similar to what NOAA is doing right now. We talked about performance measures, and then we also talked about synthesis and some of the strengths that we have in the system right now. We talked a lot about organization and strengthening the connections between scientists and managers and really making that more of an iterative process. So a good example that somebody threw out is like at the Bay Delta Science Conference, we shouldn't just present work that's done, but work that's in process so that there's more communication early on about what the management questions are. We talked about, let me go back to a few of those and just get into more detail. In terms of observational network, there was a discussion around the fact that we have a great set of long-term data now, but in the future, we will really need to expand and support the observational network, link it to things like performance measures, link it to modeling work, and really, expand that network and improve it with new data and new technologies, and that developing a plan for that would be important. In terms of integrated ecosystem assessment, Steve Lindley provided a lot of information about this process that NOAA does and how it really brings together and creates a framework for looking at indicators, looking at monitoring, looking at risk assessments, looking at a management strategy, documenting processes, looking at vulnerabilities, and really creating an observational system. So everyone said, hey, that might be doable. It's not easy, but it's certainly doable, and it might be something really good to look into. And then we talked more about performance measures. There was a shout out to the Delta Plan performance measures, which I wanted to repeat, that creates a framework, but that when you look about performance measures, when you look at performance measures, you have to make sure that they're really tied to the observational network and that they're also really tied to your modeling needs overall. There were a few comments about, we really have strong synthesis already, but we need to enhance that and continue to work with organizations like NCs, and that we have really robust conceptual models in the system, and that's really helpful for moving forward, and to continue to work on that. So that's my short summary. Did I miss anything, anyone? No? Okay, that's it.
Thank you. That was also admirably succinct, and I hope you took good notes because it sounds like you had a great discussion.
We did, yep.
Our next up, Amanda, invasive species.
Yeah. Hi, Mike. Hey, everybody. So we were another group that actually talked about a collaborative, in this case, a virtual invasive species center, to kind of start addressing a lot of the things that we talked about, which also hit on a lot of the topics that we'll be discussing during tomorrow's breakouts, around governance, coordination, and leadership, all needed for non-native and invasive species management. And it was also noted that a lot of the things that we talked about are things that we need to be doing now as well. So sometimes it was hard to kind of separate the two, but I'm not sure if we necessarily need to. I think there's a lot that we can be doing now that will also support us in making decisions in the future. So one of the things that we kind of kept coming back to was the need for more comprehensive and integrated monitoring, including more data about existing invasives and how these invasives are impacting the ecosystem now that a lot of them have been in the system for a long period of time. There's just a lot that we don't know around that, and there's more that we could know there. And then related to that, then we also need more people to synthesize the information we do have. We do recognize that there is a lot of information that we have that we are continuing to gather, but we still need more resources to actually make sense of all of it and to figure out what to do with that. And then related to resources, funding. We just need more funding. And it's not as simple as just plain getting more funding, but also kind of, doing a cost benefit analysis. I think Louise mentioned, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that we currently spend like $10 million to fight aquatic weeds. And so doing some type of a cost benefit analysis about what we're doing and if it makes sense to continue to be doing that into the future. And so having that type of information would really help us in the future as well. Finally, I think getting back to this idea of coordination, we really need to know who's responsible for what, who's monitoring what, who's in charge of, when we identify a new species, a new invasive species, who's in charge of developing some type of rapid response. So early detection, rapid response, who's in charge of all these different pieces. I think this was most recently seen in terms of nutria and figuring out how we developed a plan to start addressing nutria in the system. So there's just a really, again, as I mentioned, we kind of kept coming back to there needing to be just, I think, a lot more comprehensive and collaboratory thought around non-native and invasive species management, so that we are prepared to deal with these continued changes and the way they're going to continue to change into the future. And that's it. Oh, there was a lot more, but I'll leave it at that.
Great. And again, I hope you took good notes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Next up, Erin, water quality management.
Hi, everyone. Okay, I'll do my best to summarize our discussion. We had a great discussion, a lot of very wonderful participants. So starting with the first question, we talked a bit about scenario planning. So how would we address what issues might come up in the long term? There was discussion about scenario planning and then maybe prioritize the water quality issues that may come up in the future. For example, levee breaches or chemical spills, how we will address the upgrades to regional sand, but also talking about some emerging contaminants that maybe aren't monitored very extensively now, like microplastics, flame retardants. This year we did have deposition from wildfires that were fires that burned in urban areas. And so we may have very, different set of water quality problems that happen as a result of changes that happen on the landscape. We also talked quite a bit about harmful algal blooms. They got special attention in our discussion due to the connection with climate change effects. And, and going back to the first pre-workshop presentation that was done, talking a lot about how water temperature is going to increase in the Delta and what that will do to the probability and the pervasiveness of harmful algal blooms. So that was all a very good conversation. We did have a number of people talk about how we need to monitor all kinds of water quality. It was kind of observed that, we can focus on, we do focus in this system a little bit more intensively on elements such as pH, temperature, salinity, dissolved oxygen, and less money and monitoring effort is spent on what you might think of more as, maximum contaminant level types of contaminants. And that in order to answer the long-term questions or kind of forecast about what those long-term questions might be, better monitoring of the contaminants in the system so that we can build effective models. We had a discussion about, using models and forecasting might help us also look forward into how to help decision makers make choices in a crisis. That's mostly on question 1. I'm probably missing some things. I'm very impressed by all the other summarizers. Question 2, there were comments kind of along the lines of decision support. It wasn't really seen as used in water quality as much as it is in, outside the salinity area, more the maximum contaminant level. We see more decision support for salinity, DO, and those other types of things. And so we could use a lot more decision support for some of the other water quality elements. There was a discussion about linking hydrodynamic and biogeochemical models to inform a lot of different kinds of management, invasive aquatic beds and impacts of regional sand and what might happen with the nutrients in the Delta. The need for continuous monitoring data combined with discrete monitoring data. So working on tools and leveraging ongoing efforts to measure difficult to measure in terms of emerging contaminants, but some pesticides that can be harmful almost at detection levels. There's also a little bit of a discussion on how right now we see a trend in our monitoring systems toward emphasizing or highlighting getting answers to the question of the moment, and a little bit of a deprioritization of the status and trends work. And it was a struggle to get people to understand the value of long-term trends. So that is something that is clearly a challenge in water quality monitoring. Oh, sorry about that. My doorbell is ringing. Let's see, moving forward, and also acknowledge as a challenge that a lot of water quality monitoring has been added on piecemeal, and that it would be more effective to take a holistic look at the monitoring needs in a broad area. And we have seen examples of this in SFA regional water quality monitoring and the efforts with the Delta regional water quality monitoring, but that we probably just haven't arrived there yet. And we do need to do a better job of integrating the water quality network for the whole system. For question 3, what scientific capabilities do we need so that we can prepare for problems that will arise? One thing that was identified was it's a challenge to develop good water quality models for our system that will need to forecast how we can respond to these future problems, without being able to get funding far enough in advance to do the monitoring. And regional SAN was used as an example of this. We need to, I think right now, talk about what water quality monitoring needs to be done so that we can build models that help us with figuring out how we will adjust things in the future. One of our participants observed that the campaigns that he has worked on that seems the best were working with multiple investigators looking at the same processes at the same time from different points of view. So water quality, lower trophic levels, higher trophic levels, and that it is hard to get that funding structure that value is coming at it from these different approaches. And let's see, maybe last I'll just talk about folks identifying that need, or just that there's a value of establishing a network of real-time sensors in the Delta so that we in the future can have access to water quality data. And I guess I would just follow up that with beyond data, we really need to transfer things into information so that a number doesn't go up on a website for which someone can't interpret it. That we provide context for people and we take the data that we have and we provide someone at the other end of that website information that helps them directly, whether that be a harmful algal bloom or some other water quality monitoring element that helps them make a decision that day. And I don't really think we got to question 4. So that was, I think I will leave it at that.
Sounds good. Thank you. Harriet, land use management.
Yes. Hello. Okay. So I'm going to try to summarize our discussion in 5 minutes. So for land use management, we talked about how we can better prepare ourselves to manage unexpected crises by having a scenario planning tool for the entire region across all local, state, and federal entities that is more dynamic and where the data layers are updated regularly. And we talked a little bit about how there is the Delta Landscape Planning tool that could be used as the backbone and could be updated in the future to be used for this purpose specifically. We talked about needing a unified system of land use data that is accessible to the public, that has been ground truthed so that everyone will buy into it and use it across all levels of government. We talked about needing visualization capabilities, tools, and analyses available so that decision makers can understand the climate change impacts to make actionable decisions. We need to continually monitor and learn from the projects that are implemented, such as the ecosystem restoration projects, and land use data to understand where the tipping points are and when we need to accelerate action. We also talked about how land use management in the future should really consider ecosystem service benefits and what the value of those services are as we make decisions about land use, which also have economic impacts. For example, agricultural operations, growing crops have benefits to wildlife and the ecosystem itself. So if we were to convert ag land to urban development, then the loss of those ecosystem services should be accounted for in the value of those benefits. We also had a bit, of a higher level discussion. We really couldn't get into too much of the detail as we start to go through these questions, and really kind of those specific questions were difficult to answer because there's a lot of uncertainty. And it really depends on, these questions are sort of designed for like one topic, and where land use really covers a lot. We cover flooding, we cover different types of climate change impacts affect land use, as well as what we're actually doing. So it was a little bit difficult. Various entities have specific questions they're trying to answer. So it was hard to answer these questions down to in more detail. We really had to stay higher level. And then we generally thought that we had the capabilities within the science enterprise to do all of these things that we need, such as a Delta landscape, or such as some type of landscape tool, some type of visualization tool as well, but that maybe not each organization had the resources to use and maintain that data. Those are the high level points. Team, if there's anything I missed that you think we should add, please go ahead.
Nothing to add. Thanks, Harriet.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thanks very much, Harriet. And our last group, Sarah, are you ready to talk about Delta as evolving place?
Yes. So I think I will break it up into just 2 primary areas. I think the first being the what we talked about during our time together, and then the second being the how. So I think the what really speaks to the first question. So, and I think as a group, we echoed many of the social science task force recommendations, but I think we also dug in a little more deeply in certain areas. The what we focused on was primarily around establishing baseline indicators around how people live in and experience the Delta, and in engaging, educating, and learning from Delta residents. So in terms of the baseline indicator portion of our conversation, we talked about making sure that we draw on existing data, census data, existing reports. We can get at demographics, we can get at some of the industry needs and impacts relative to the Delta, but we also recognize there are a lot of gaps. And so many of those gaps have to do with the more qualitative experience that people have with the Delta. whether people are lacking access, whether people are fearful of impacts in the future, whether certain groups have been excluded from certain benefits in the Delta. Those are going to be harder things to study. And so we talked about how to engage those who have been traditionally excluded, especially particular racial groups, economic groups, people who have not felt comfortable or welcome around the Delta. So we talked about that and how to engage. We also talked about making sure that data collection and engagement involves local governments and local government leaders. That a lot of times looking at place and experience on the Delta, we focus on policy around big state systems, even federal policy, but we don't spend a lot of time with cities and counties and special districts. And so that's where a lot of the decisions actually get made that impact the Delta. And so engaging them and also looking at how we can draw on the history that communities have around use in the Delta. And so that's, I think those are a number of the themes around what that we talked about. Around how, one of the things we focused on most, like many of the groups, is this notion of needing to bring together a kind of collective, some kind of collaborative or network organization focused more on social science. We talked about some of the barriers to creating a more coordinated social science endeavor. And so some of those barriers have to do with incentives or lack of incentives in higher education, say for scholars, social science scholars, to focus in on the Delta over time. And I think somebody commented on the fact that we have funds for endangered species, not for endangered humans. So we don't have a lot of dollars tied in the same way to social science activities around the Delta. And so we've got to figure out what kinds of funding mechanisms will help with this kind of research. And then we also talked about helping people prepare around critical events. And so engaging the public and really learning from the public around the critical events that they forecast and bringing people together in concrete ways around what that means for policy. And then finally, we had some, I think, some really important conversation around, I think, what Natasha called kitchen table information. And this was the idea that making sure that whatever social science data is collected, whatever kind of clearinghouse is put together, that information is really accessible to people, the kinds of things that members of the public want to know when they sit around the kitchen table. You know, is the water safe? Can I eat this fish? You know, where can I go to do X in the Delta region? And so making sure that we include a broad community in terms of thinking about the social science endeavors. So let's see, for those who are participating, any other ideas or comments or things I might not have captured?
I think that was great, Sarah. This is Chelsea.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And thanks to your group. Thanks to all the groups. And I didn't say this in connection with all of the report outs, but I hope everyone took good notes, because it sounds like there are probably some additional discussion that didn't come out in these roundups that we would really like to see. Okay, that's all the groups, and we still have plenty of time. So we do have a few questions, and I'm sorry to put people on the spot, but hey, Rosemary, I see you have a comment at 3:50 p.m. that looked like it was addressed to the Water Supply Management Group, but then it looks like there's a dialogue between you and Louise Conrad a little bit later on. Is there did your question get addressed?
Well, I had two questions. The first was, or the one that I was talking to Louise about was, you know, the idea of a collaboratory, and there are already so many groups that collaborate on science and management discussions, like the CAMPT, Collaborative Adaptive Management Team, Interagency Ecological Program. And I just wanted to get a little more clarification on how what is being proposed is different than what is existing, and whether it would just be yet another group, yet another meeting to go to. Mm-hmm. And I think Louise pointed out that, you know, we need more management involved with the science collaboration, because we have a lot of scientific groups, but not a lot that really bridge that gap. But then my other question on the water supply management was that there was the suggestion that we need to make sure research is continuous. And I just wanted a little clarification about what that meant, because I often think of monitoring as something you want to be continuous, but research is often, tackling a specific question to get a specific answer. And then once you have the answer to that question, you move on to the next question.
So,
I would invite Nancy Vogel to respond to that.
Yeah, sure. That's exactly what my notes say, is that make sure research is continuous. You need funding for that. So obviously monitoring needs to be continuous. That was part of the conversation. I'm sorry I had like 4 minutes to pull this together and didn't make a distinction between research and monitoring. I think funding is what everybody agreed needs to be continuous and steady and not boom and bust.
Excellent.
Great.
And
great.
also, when there are studies that come to an end, one of the problems that we've got is that they then go on the shelf and aren't integrated into a fuller understanding of what's going on, so that when you later face a crisis, you haven't got a synthesis of all those one-off studies that are on the shelf.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Michael.
Mike, this is Jessica Law. Can I just elaborate for a minute on the collaboratory?
Yeah, I was also going to invite Peter Goodwin. If you'd like to go first, I'll invite him afterward.
I think Peter would be great to talk about it.
Peter, I see that you're in the audience. Would you mind explaining the collaboratory concept?
Yeah, certainly, Mike. So I think this idea is it mirrors what's been done in other branches of science, and you would need to define exactly what it comprises. But the combination of a physical facility and virtual collaboration that enables you to bring together diverse models, data mining of various data streams, so that the right information is there for the scientists to interpret and address specific problems. So Mike, as we discussed in our section, it might be worth perhaps inviting the ISB or the science program to elaborate that in a little more detail. But really, it's using technology to enable knowledge discovery and rapid assimilation of information to inform decision making. Just one other element. The beauty of this is where it's been done, it pulls together very disparate science disciplines, people from agencies, academia, private sector, wherever the expertise lies. So very broadly, and I'm sure there's many others, just seeing some of the names here that may wish to add to that.
We'll start with Jessica.
Thanks. It's hard to, I don't know how much more I can elaborate on that, other than just some context and history that this is a long-standing idea that's been kicking around in the system, going back to maybe it was a 2012 workshop that we did with the National Science Foundation. And it's really aimed at improving integrated modeling and data integration across the system. There's a range of ideas of scale of how big it could be or how small it could be. And I think being in the COVID sort of global pandemic world that we're in now, where we're all working more virtually, it adds an interesting twist to the story and to the concept. And so it might be something to revisit again with all of our new and improved virtual working tools that we have. But the science program has been chipping away at the idea. I'd encourage everyone to look at the Integrated Modeling Steering Committee and the work that's coming out of that group. And then there's also been discussions of, starting from something very specific, a single pilot project to try and bring the work together in a way that would model what the collaboratory would look like to, just full on launching it and trying to get funding for it. So There's definitely a longstanding need for it, but I think the idea is really that we're bringing together the modeling information and data and really sort of the best minds together to work through these problems in a much more integrated way. So I'm sure there are many others on this in this workshop that can elaborate more than I can.
Yeah, and I would just add before we go on that that Mark Lubell also posed a question, and I think, Mark, the answer to your question is that the technological approach of a collaboratory goes beyond, like a Slack channel. It involves the sharing of the analytical tools that are actually used to address questions to data. Does that satisfy you?
Yes.
Great. So I've got a question. Daniel, sorry if I missed something in the notes. Is there a section for Indigenous participation / issues, history, practices, contacts, etc.? I think that question is probably directed at land use management or Delta as an evolving place, but I'd be delighted if anyone else can address it. Nobody? Well, I'm not hearing an answer, Daniel, so I guess that is an answer to your question. If you want to send us a note in regard to this question, that would be something that we would take notice of.
I actually, in our discussion of Delta as an evolving place, there was a lot of discussion of working with environmental justice and social justice types of communities. Not so much tribes or indigenous communities was not directly mentioned, but I'm sure that that would, that discussion would include that, and it was Restore the Delta. Barbara Berrigan was pointing out some work that they've done around that. That includes trying to include those community voices. So I think that is the type of thing that would be a good starting place.
And this is Natasha for Delta Protection Commission. When we're forming our national heritage area over the next few years, we will be reaching out to tribal governments. But unfortunately, there was many events that extirpated and excluded Native Americans from this area, and we don't have any contextual information because their communities were destroyed. So we don't have very much to go on within the Delta itself. But I'm not an expert, just that's what I've heard secondhand.
Great, thank you. Just getting back to the collaboratory issue, there are a couple of URLs in the that are posted in the chat channel that that folks might want to take a look at that provide links to examples or discussions of the collaboratory concept. So I would refer you to those. Okay, we've gotten to the, I believe we've gotten to the end of the questions that were in the chat. Hey, Dylan, I'm looking at your comment here. Is this more about collaboratory?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I would also refer everybody to Dylan's comment that has a URL at the bottom. And this actually, I think this actually would elaborate on Jessica's comments regarding what the Stewardship Council and Science Program have been doing in this regard. Okay, at this point, since we're out of I think we're out of questions in the chat channel, I would invite anyone who wants to raise a hand, and we'll go around. Can be any subject. Gil.
Yeah, thank you. So on the collaboratory topic, I'm not a scientist, so I've got a situation in my mind, and I kind of wonder how the collaboratory would work. And I was reminded of it by a couple things. One, Michael George made the comment about studies that get put on the shelf. And right away, my mind started going to CalFed and the $3 billion we spent on studies that you rarely see the light of day these days. And then during the presentations a few minutes ago, the slide that you guys used to show the flood management responses happened to be a flooding of Van Sickle Island. And during CalFed in 1998, the Western Delta and Central Delta experienced the highest tide ever recorded, and the Suisun Marsh and Western Delta were just decimated. And because of that, they noticed that the flooding of Van Sickle Island caused some impacts to the water quality for the State Water Project and CBP. So that came out around 99, 2000, that this 2,500 acre island, which is half in the Delta, half in the Suisun Marsh, if it stayed flooded with an uncontrolled breach, would have long-term effects on the state and federal water quality for exporters. And that kind of just sat there for a while. And then the last few floods, 2006 and 2017, Van Sickle has decided, we cannot keep this levee up anymore. And so almost 2 years ago, I approached DWR about the possibility of helping them out, not to necessarily maintain their levee. They want to just get by, and they're duck hunters. So if it happened to be some sort of controlled breach, would that be something DWR would be interested in because it would protect their water quality? And the answer was, I got sent over to the Eco Restore people, and they said, well, it's not enough habitat benefit. And so I was a little bit dismayed that why didn't they understand that for all these years we've been resting on this study that showed you got some problems over there. And I came to with our client that this is pretty much throwing their hands up saying this is going to be a problem because we can't come back if it floods next year. So that's the kind of stuff would a collaboratory cover that so that this sort of thing will pop up as an issue for somebody to study in the future? I don't know.
Comments? Steve Culberson.
Hey, Mike. Hi, Gilbert. Nice to hear from you. Yeah, I think in my version of a collaboratory, one of the things that you would enable would be the completion of what I call 75% conversations. So in a lot of fora that I attend, you've got enough people there to tee up problems and to talk pretty illustratively and helpfully about potential solutions. But you might not have the last 2 or 3 people that you actually need in the room to sort of, push a decision over some sort of, finish line. And in my view, the collaboratory would be a place where you would more or less demand that you have the decision makers there with you, or at least let them know that, this is a good place for them to spend their time. And maybe we'd have a better shot at actually, pushing some of these decisions over the finish line, because I like you, Gilbert, I think I know a lot of the details and a lot of the context of the situation you describe. And I think what we lack is just, that final level of engagement to push this, over some threshold at all of the various agencies that need to come to a conclusion, because I think everyone would support, most of what you're describing. But a lot of times we just don't have the decision makers in the room when we're talking the technical stuff. Anyway, that's my perspective.
Thank you. Okay, the floor is open. Other questions, comments, and there are at least 3 people who are on the phone who probably haven't been able to see any of what we've been doing. Do you folks on the phone have any questions you want to raise for the group? Hearing nothing, I will open the floor one more time to hand raising, general comments, questions that people may have about what we did today or what we'll do tomorrow. Okay, great. Before I turn it over to Steve Brandt to sum up for today, I want to once again commend the chat for this last plenary discussion to everyone. question of a collaboratory because there are a number of really useful links in the chat. So don't miss it. Okay, at this point, is Steve Brent lurking somewhere in the room?
I'm working.
I'll turn the floor over to you.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Well, if my scientific evaluation of today's output is wow, and I think that we ask you to be bold and creative and don't hold back on your ideas, and I guess you all debate us, and I think I heard some really thoughtful ideas that really reflects the sort of the extensive background of that you all have in the Delta. And so I want to thank everybody for their enthusiastic participation and encourage them to come back tomorrow. We will reconvene tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning, and tomorrow's effort will be spent on trying to look at the governance and funding and integration and collaborative component of how we go about and organize the science enterprise in a way that might help us to achieve some of the science we identified today. So when you come back tomorrow, it starts at 9 o'clock. Come back to the general plenary room and meet us there. So Amanda, is there anything else, or can we adjourn?
I get off mute. No, I think we can adjourn. Thank you all for participating today, and I look forward to the conversations tomorrow as well.
Yeah, and one more big thank you to our plenary speakers, Peter, Felicia, and Ernest. That was very informative, and it was very good to have them here, and it was much appreciated.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, thanks everyone. We're officially adjourned.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thanks.
Bye. Bye,
Good night.
Peter.